I call Pene Henare.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to take this short call. And just before I start, Mr. Chair, I just want to congratulate you, because every time you resume the House, Mr. Chair, in your role as both Mr. Chair and Mr. Speaker, you always can welcome everybody back in Te Reo Māori, and it's more than just a kia ora. It's actually something very appropriate for the time and for the occasion. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui kia koe. Mr. Chair, I just... just to the bill at hand, the Objectionable Publications and Indecency Legislation Bill. I wasn't on the Select Committee, but I'm fortunate to be on the Justice and Electoral Select Committee now. And I did have the opportunity to speak in the second reading, so I'm excited to get up now just to flesh out a few more of the thoughts that I had then, in the hope that some clarification can come about. Now, my colleagues have mentioned an overall strategy around justice and whether or not there's a coherent approach to dealing with such matters, especially for such an abhorrent crime. And I think the recent report released on the Roastbusters case, Mr. Chair, certainly highlights a few questions for myself. One of those is around how in part 1 of the proposed bill, Mr. Chair, it talks about increased sentences from 5 to 10 years, and I think the other one is here from 10 to 14 years. One for the importing, that's 5 to 10 years, and for the distribution, 10 to 14 years. I just wonder, in light of the Roastbusters case, Mr. Chair, that if those penalties were about, would that be deterrent enough for those young men who were involved in that particular case? And some of the statistics, and my colleagues have mentioned some of it this evening, perhaps question that. I can't see the direct link to it being a clear deterrent, especially when we know, and the report says here, Mr. Chair, of the 131 offenders that have been sentenced to a term of imprisonment, approximately 50% have been sentenced to less than 20% of the maximum sentence available, and maximum sentence available, and 89% have been sentenced to less than 40% of the maximum sentence available. Now, I'm just trying to find a link there between why harsher penalties should be an absolute deterrent for such a crime, when I think what the report more importantly did was highlight some inefficiencies, or some deficiencies, sorry, in the ability to be able to police such terrible crimes. And some of the colleagues in the House have already mentioned just how hard and difficult that will be in the fast changing times of modern technology, what with the internet and the ability to access it at any time and at any place. The avoidance of doubt, Mr. Chair, speaking in clause 5, it targets technical expertise, and the definition without consciously downloading or sourcing. Now, it has already been mentioned this evening about just being able to view it. It's just being able to glance at it, just being able to see it. Now, in many cases, I'm afraid, and I notice how, having a young son myself who involves himself in a young scene, how easy it is just to wave around cell phones, to show Facebook feeds, to be able to share an internet page just by turning around a laptop or a cell phone, and whether or not that makes his friends culpable, or certainly fall under this proposed bill, Mr. Chair, whether or not they can be prosecuted, or whether or not they fall under this proposed bill and could find themselves in a heck of a lot of trouble. My esteemed colleague here, Claire Curran, mentioned how it distorts the relativity with physical offending, and it's been highlighted already, but I want to continue on that point, Mr. Chair, tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. I want to continue on that point to talk about how it does distort the relativity between physical offending and, of course, the nature of offending that this bill proposes to sort out, or to squash, or certainly to be able to bring relevant penalties or pertinent penalties to those offenders. And we noticed that by increasing the penalty time from 5 to 10 years and from 10 years to 14 years. My concern, Mr. Chair.
Just sorry, I've just come into the chair. I'll just consult the list. Pene Henare.
Oh, tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. And just as I heap praise upon Mr. Burrows in his time before you, I do so, and I thank you for the opportunity to continue. So I was talking, Mr. Chair, about how it distorts the relativity between physical offending and the kind of offending that this bill proposes to deal with. And by increasing the penalties, the imprisonment time from 5 years to 10 years for importing and 10 to 14 years for distribution, I wonder, and I hope that the Minister, or certainly those who were part of the Select Committee during this bill, can explain or at least provide a bit of clarification around that, the relativity that it's talking about there, because in order to impose harsher penalties just for the mere distribution or for the importing of such terrible crime, terrible images and what have you, I'm concerned that it's still such serious offending that when you consider the actual physical act of offending, of sexual abuse of young children, of minors, that they're sort of lumped as one and the same, when quite clearly the evidence and indeed some of the submissions and the kōrero that I hear around this particular piece, this particular bill, is very, very clear, and it highlights the ongoing effects and mental effects that it has on the victims and their families and their friends. So just for a bit of clarification, Mr. Chair, around that, about how it distorts the relativity with physical offending. And some of the terms in here, Mr. Chair, are very technical, probably far too technical for this individual, but there are some, and Mr. Clendon has already touched on it, about the vagaries of some of the words that are being used. And I also, oh sorry, no, I won't speak about that. That's part two. I'll stick to part one. Bear with me, Mr. Chair. I can't find the term. However, I do know that Mr. Clendon spoke about there are some vagaries around and very technical terms, and what we're hoping in this piece of, in this bill that's being proposed, Mr. Chair, is that some clearer definition can be given to allow the proper process to take place with the judiciary, and to give the court system, or the judiciary, the judicial system, the right framework to allow them to make sure that this bill certainly squashes the kind of behaviour and activities that it intends to. Nō reira, kia ora e te heamana, ka tira, tēnā tātou.
Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr.